Guild Wars 2 is a beautiful MMORPG, one that I've spent hundreds of hours in, but my experience is just that. My experience, singular. What I want to do today is something different. Instead of another "Is Guild Wars 2 worth playing in X year" video, I want to instead bring 5 of the largest, most talented, knowledgeable content creators in all of Guild Wars 2 together to give you their thoughts, their experience. In my opinion, their cumulative total experiences are worth significantly more than my own. And hopefully, after sitting through the entirety of this video, you go away with your question answered. Before we jump in though, I do want to not only say thank you to Emmy, MightyTeapot, Laranity, CaffeinatedDad, and Mukluk for taking the time out of their busy schedules to chat, but also to thank our incredible patrons over on Patreon who allow for me to continue to do videos like this every single week. You guys are all amazing. If I were to explain Guild Wars 2 to a person that has absolutely no idea what this game is and attempt to convert them from whatever they were playing or to trying the game out as an entirely new player, I would describe it as being a complex open world MMO with a very large emphasis on narrative and community, where there is no vertical grind that caters to both competitive and casual players. But let's hear what everyone else has to say.
The way I would describe Guild Wars 2 is that it is the MMO for non-MMO players.
First thing I would ask them is, have they played an MMO before? If they haven't, I would be explaining that.
Guild Wars 2 is a game about freedom. I think this is, in fact, the key selling point of the game is that you can play the game however you want to do it. And you don't have to do anything in the game that you don't want to do to accomplish your goals. I think this is a really defining selling point of the game and something that a lot of other MMOs actually kind of fall down on a little bit.
So Guild Wars 2 is an MMORPG that is, first of all, just really high production value. It's very polished, like all the animations are nice, the art is nice, everything just feels good about it, everything's voice access. But at the same time, it's sort of got a twist compared to most MMOs that you would play usually. And a lot of these twists are like really interesting if you're like into MMOs. They do a lot of stuff that other MMOs do, but then they do it slightly differently.
Guild Wars 2 can both be a gourmet feast worth of content or a quick fast food bite. And the way that I would translate that and the way that I would approach that, especially to a new player or to a player who's in another MMO, is that Guild Wars 2 can fit wherever you want to put as far as the amount of effort into this game.
Typically when you think about like MMOs, especially a lot of the older ones, you think of like long-term grinds, you're upgrading your gear, you're becoming stronger over time. And as you become stronger over time, you're tackling more and more difficult bosses. That is true to some extent in Guild Wars 2. There is a soft gear progression, there is a character progression, there's a mastery progression and all that kind of stuff. But instead of focusing on, I guess, the vertical grind, it has a lot more horizontal options.
The game respects your time more than many MMOs. You can put it down, come back in 5 months. Your character is still just as relevant as it was before. You might just need to get, you might be rusty. You might have to get the dust off. But it's your gear doesn't go out of date. It's not like they just added a new item level and you've got to grind all your same gear and acquire it again before you can group with people.
Right. In Guild Wars 2, if you want to load up Guild Wars 2 and you want to start playing PvP at level 2 and never ever leave, you can do that, right? If you want to get the best in slot gear, legendary armor and stuff like that, all the cosmetics, and farm your gold entirely in the open world without doing any raids or dungeons or whatever, you can do that too. Or if you just want to, if you want to grind those dungeons all day, do raids all day, you can do that too. So I think that it's the freedom and the choice that the game gives you in what you want to do and how you want to approach it and how you want to engage in the game that is probably like the biggest thing about it. It's an MMO about choice. It's an MMO about playing the game in the way that you want to, right? And in completing the content and doing the activities that you particularly enjoy and progressing your account in that way.
There is no gear treadmill, which means that if you play the game long term, basically the gear level never changes. The level cap never changes. It's still the same as it was 10 years ago. Which makes the game really interesting because you can easily take a break, so it's possible to play the game super casually. But it also means that like the game becomes really skill oriented because everybody's sort of at the same level. You can't really just attain more power by playing more. The one way to get better is to just get good, kind of. Which means that the game is both really approachable to casual players that just want to play a bit, but if you really want to go hard There is a lot to learn.
You can pick and choose what's important to you and make it fit with your particular situation, your life, how much time you can devote to the game.
Especially where I am right now in my life. I can't no life a game anymore, right? It's like that's just the reality of my life. I have other responsibilities and stuff. So to have a game where it's like I can step away for a couple months, come back, and all of my gear especially is still relevant, but I can tackle the new content where my gear is still relevant is very appealing to me. And I think that is definitely very appealing for a big population in Guild Wars 2. It's casual friendly in the sense of gear, but it can be very competitive in terms of your personal skill expression. I think that the combat system, actually, if we wanted to talk about another thing that I think Guild Wars 2 really excels in, is genuinely the combat system. It's very dynamic because you're not limited by global cooldowns, and you can do a lot of really cool things where you can like weapon stow to animation cancel, you can dodge roll to like avoid mechanics, you can time specific skill usages to like block or evade or invulnerability certain things, all that kind of stuff. And so it has a lot of depth to it.
And that's also where the combat system kind of comes in. It's really fast, it's really satisfying, and it's honestly easy to pick up, but very hard to master. So there's kind of something for everyone.
The thing that keeps me playing the game is the combat system. Every game has its own slightly different combat system. World of Warcraft is tab targeting with a couple of spells like, Blizzard, where you have like a targeting reticule, but it's mostly tab targeting. Guild Wars 2, every single button virtually you can click without a target. So like if you think a rogue or thief is stealthed in front of you, you can swing your weapon wildly and try to clip them. But in like WoW, most of your weapon skills, you don't have that option. You cannot swing sword if you don't have someone in front of you. The dodging mechanic is, if you've got any viewers that have ever played Dark Souls, it's like a Dark Souls dodge, but it's a little bit more simplified. But easy to pick up, hard to master. But the combination of the combat system with dodges and stuff like that make it a very, very fun combat system.
If you wanted to, you could level from 1 to 80 in the starter zone. That is an option. I'm not sure I'd recommend it, but you could do it. But yeah, and you of course can do all the endgame content in any order you want as well. And I think that's definitely a key point in the game.
Level scaling, you can play with, if you have a high level friend that convinces you to play the game, you can play with them right away. They can join you in the newbie zone. They get scaled down to your level, and they're still a little bit more powerful, but you can play together. I remember the first time I saw World Boss was the Shadow Behemoth, which is in the human newbie zone. I was like level 8. I ran into this thing, and there was a whole bunch of level people ranging from 8 to 80 that were side by side fighting this thing. I thought it was one of the coolest things I'd ever seen. It's like these people were shoulder to shoulder, and all of them were contributing in a meaningful way because of the way the scaling worked.
Evidently, Guild Wars 2 is a very unique MMO. But what makes it different from its competition? Games like WoW or Final Fantasy XIV or Black Desert Online. Is it its PvE, its PvP, the world setting, exploration, or narrative? To me, Guild Wars 2 is very complex in so that it isn't a linear MMO by traditional standards. There's no typical questing system, the entire world is synced, level squished, and there is an enormous focus on open world content, dynamic events, exploration, hero points, points of interest. I wonder if the others have similar things to say.
Okay, so there's a few things. Like the horizontal progression is probably the huge one. The fact that it's very, very quick to get to max level, but then there's a million things that never went out of date to do at max level. So they keep adding more, like for those people who may watch this video that never have played Guild Wars 2, imagine they keep adding more you play WoW and then another raid comes out, but the old raids don't, you don't get squished down. It's not like in World of Warcraft, I remember going back and soloing old raids to farm stuff. The old raids don't get easier in Guild Wars 2. Now there is some power creep, so they do get easier in that way, but it's still, for most of the player base, if this was a 10-man raid 5 years ago, it's still a 10-man raid today. With rare exceptions. There's a few psychopaths like Lord Hyzen that can go solo some of this crazy stuff.
I would say that out of all MMORPGs that I've played, Guild Wars 2 has got easily the best open world content. I think in many MMORPGs, the open world is sort of an afterthought. Like you go there while you level, you do some questing and stuff like that. But in Guild Wars 2, the open world is really an integral part of not only the leveling, but also the end game. You've got all this stuff happening in the open world. You've got these large-scale meta events that you can go and do. And it basically means that you don't just go there to do boring quests. There are actually like interesting fights happening in the open world. There's a huge focus on like doing these meta events, on doing like exploration. I think that's that's really one of the things that does set the game apart. Just if you compare it to different MMORPGs, where often, like at some point, you kind of stop doing open world stuff and you just transition to like raids and dungeons. And Go to Studio, open world stays an integral part of the game.
I would say the thing that Guild Wars 2 does best, and significantly better than any other MMO in my opinion, is that it's massively multiplayer. Right, I think a lot of MMOs these days, they're kind of instance simulators. Not that there's anything wrong with that, by the way. I'm personally enjoying WoW a lot right now, which is the ultimate instance simulator. So to be clear, I'm not flaming instance simulators. But Guild Wars 2 has massive amounts of players all over the place, right? Like if you're doing the open world PvE, you're going to have like 100 people sometimes, like all beating down a boss at the same time. Super cool. Or on the PvP side, you have World versus World, right, where you have potentially like 70 players per team, more or less, and there's, you know, it's a three-way, like a 1v1v1 realm v realm style battle. You get these massive battles. So I think what Guild Wars does really well is the open world PvE, so like the meta events, like the big world bosses, open world bosses, and also World versus World, which is the realm v realm kind of open world PvP style game mode thing. That is where Guild Wars 2, in my opinion, really defines itself and sets itself apart from the competition.
But I think by far the most popular out of everything that I've seen is the open world. The sense of exploration in Guild Wars 2 is probably one of its crowning features, and then this dynamic, evolving, we'll say, events that are occurring all across any given map that you're on is just, I think that's what's fun.
Biggest difference is that, again, it's the horizontal progression, right? And I think a big part of this horizontal progression, if we had to nail down one thing specifically, is the open world. I think very few other MMOs have an open world that is as intricately designed as Guild Wars 2. Just again, speaking from personal experience, playing the minimal amount of like RuneScape and Final Fantasy, typically the maps are very small with notable points of interest, but those points of interest are just like quest markers, right? Like you go there to talk to an NPC and then you go back to the main city and then you kind of like do like fetch quests like that, right? There's not really that much in between, so to speak. Guild Wars 2, on the other hand, it doesn't have the traditional like fetch quest system, and instead there's a lot of world building just because there's NPCs walking around, there's dynamic events that are happening in different locations, and it's dynamic events that are moving across the map. I feel like that's a really big thing. It's like, it's not like this one event spawns in this one location and then you have to wait 10 minutes for it to spawn, and of course there are things like that, but many times there are what are called event chains, right? So it's like you do an event here, that event immediately spawns another event which takes you to a different part of the map. And then when you're in that different part of the map, then another event spawns, which might spawn like a boss or something like that, that has like a unique drop. And sometimes, like depending on how you actually complete that event, you might actually, it might split, right? You might have like one possibility this way, another possibility this way. And I guess that's something that I think is very rare in MMOs, because I think, again, for a lot of other MMOs, they seem to focus a lot on vertical character progression instead of the open world. And also, I think there's a much bigger emphasis on instance content.
Yeah, I would say that the open world being such a focus is definitely one of the biggest ones.
Guild Wars 2 doesn't have any competition, really, with in my opinion, to the whole open world exploration. You go out there, you group up with some friends, you run across a boss, you do this awesome meta event, you get some loot, and everyone just goes on their way. It's a great feeling, especially in that sense of not only the sense of like just fun, there's just random things happening, but like community. Everyone came together to tackle this massive boss or to do this event that requires coordination on different parts, and everyone was successful. Everyone gets loot, and then you move on. You can't beat it.
Yeah, and of course there is solo content in the game. Like you don't have to always play with a million other people. And the game is very solo friendly as well, for sure. In fact, like all the really large group content, it's actually funny. It's almost paradoxical, of course. But a lot of the content that we were just talking about, the open world PvE and the world versus world stuff, it's actually some of the most solo friendly content in the entire game, right? Like you can very much just kind of blend in with the swarm and play your game at the same time. Or if you want to engage more, you of course can, right? Hopping on Discord and stuff like that, and kind of playing in organized squads. That's also a kind of part of that experience, but it's very much optional, right? So yeah, it definitely does. You're absolutely right. It sets it apart very strongly, I think, from the competition. Not a lot of MMOs really capture, the feeling of playing with that amount of players, right? It's very common to see, a raid group of 10 players, of 20 players.
Since there's no real vertical climb, what is there even to really do in game? Do you run dungeons? Do you do raids, participate in competitive PvP? Admittedly, While I have been max level in the past, I've never really participated in any of the competitive game modes. And while I do know what people tend to do in game, I don't think that I could really do it any justice if I tried. So I'll let the others answer this one.
Once you've exhausted all of like the things to do in the open world, so again, things like exploration and like the meta events and kind of like gearing up your character a little bit more, getting into the crafting system, I think that's where a lot of people start stepping into what I consider to be the end game PvE content, right? So end game PvE content, not just encompassing like I guess like instance stuff. So whenever people think about instance content, they typically think about things like raids or strike missions or fractals or that kind of thing, right? But I would say even before that is doing the big meta events with more organized groups, and these organized groups are telling people the importance of specific builds or team comps or like very commonly like use like skills or weapons like for specific parts of like the encounter, that kind of thing. And then from there, I think a lot of people end up getting a little bit of an interest in things like dungeons, fractals, strike missions, and raids. And then they kind of like go into a training guild or something like that might show them the ropes, that kind of thing. And then a couple of those people might then become what I consider very high level players.
I really like structured PvP specifically because it removes your main gear out of the question and puts everyone kind of onto a level playing field. Everyone has access to the same, we'll say, amulets where all of our stats come from. And then you can build out your character how you want with whatever your account has unlocked, and then you can go to town. That means that a level 2, you finish the opening story mission, and then as soon as you're level 2, you can go up there against, like completed level 80s. You're brought up to that max level, and you're able to.
PvP is a 5v5 game mode called Conquest that involves a large-ish map, and you have 3 capture points on it, and you have to fight over these capture points. It's actually a really good game mode, and in my opinion, and I'm being honest here, I'm not being unbiased. I'm not being unbiased. That was a Freudian slip right there. I am actually unbiased here. I genuinely think, no joke, that Guild Wars 2 PvP is the best designed PvP in any MMO, and it's honestly not even close. It really isn't. Now, I have got to caveat this, I have got to be honest. Unfortunately, I wouldn't actually classify PvP to be a super amazing experience right now because the population is unfortunately very, very low. So match quality isn't the highest, not gonna lie. And sometimes there's some balance issues that you kind of run into there. But from a systemic point of view, the PvP is good. And as long as you don't take it too seriously, it's actually a lot of fun in my opinion, even now, actually.
The World versus World is basically PvP, but on large scale. You're capturing forts and camps and keeps. There's catapults, there's trebuchets, there's cannons, there's mechs. There's all kinds of stuff. And it's basically like at its pinnacle, it'd be like 70 versus 70 versus 70 three-way battles. And then the only loser is your video card. So, I mean, it just... At that point, you're turning your graphics settings down. You're like, all right, just turn everybody into stickman until I get through with this fight.
Well, the game has got this... It's one of the biggest things that people initially wonder. It's like, there's no bigger level cap. There's no better gear for me to get. What is there actually to chase, right? What is actually the thing that people keep coming back for? I think a huge part of this is legendary gear. Guild Wars 2 has got these sort of like super prestigious legendary items you can get. There's legendary armor, there's legendary weapons, legendary trinkets, and those don't really give you additional power, but they give you this like massive quality of life boost. You can transmute them for free, you can use them across multiple characters, you can stat swap them whenever you want, because there's really deep build craft to Guild Wars 2. I think that's one of the things that keeps people logging in, just chasing this gear, which you don't necessarily need as a casual player, but it is really nice to have, and it's sort of like leads you into all those other game modes, right? There's like a legendary you can get for fractals, which is kind of like our dungeon game mode. There's legendary armor that you can get using raids. There's legendaries you can get in PvP or in World versus World. There's lots of different game modes to the game, and these legendaries are a big motivator to get people logging in and into these game modes.
There are dungeons. Dungeons, the old version of dungeons, kind of have been just like left alone for many, many years because they replaced them with another system called fractals. And fractals were actually, a lot of people don't know this, were actually the inspiration behind World of Warcraft making their mythic pluses. This was many years ago. Mythic Pluses were literally a copy of Fractals, and then they did take it another way. So it wasn't just like, they copied the homework and then that's it. They did eventually go a different way with it. Fractals, there are 100 levels of Fractals. They're all 5-man content. There's like 25 different maps. So each map has like a tier 1, 2, 3, and 4 version for a total of like 100 maps. And the Fractals every day have 3 buffs or debuffs in play. Like one is called Sugar Rush and all the mobs move faster. One's called Separation. Was it called Separation Anxiety? No. It's social awkwardness. And if you stand too close to another player, you guys push each other apart. So you can actually, or on purpose, bump your allies off cliffs, where usually there's no collision. And one's called like Bleed Fire. And anytime you hit an enemy, you get a burning stack. That one's always fun for the healers. They stay very busy on that one. But every day these change. So even if you do the same map every day, it's different each day because there's like 30 different buffs and debuffs in this pool, and the game just picks 3 of them each day for each map. So fractals stay quite fresh if you're into that. It's also very profitable content. So the fractal system basically replaced dungeons as the top 5-man content in the game.
This is the game mode that if someone came up to me and said, you have to pick one and delete the others, or you're only allowed to play one game mode forever, right? You have to pick this one and you never play any of those ever again. I'd pick World versus World. And that is the Realm v Realm open world style PvP. It's fantastic. It really is.
Guild Wars 2 was considered for many years to be a dead game. And that was warranted. There was a period of several years between Heart of Thorns, Path of Fire, and End of Dragons, where there was very little in terms of content. But with Secrets of the Obscure, ArenaNet seems dedicated to increasing their content cadence. With the rise of other MMOs and gacha games absorbing current MMO players and completely eclipsing the MMO genre, does Guild Wars 2 have a future? Honestly, I personally believe the game is still peaking, setting records for the studio. But that is also from an outsider perspective that's looking purely at the stats. I'll let the others weigh in here.
Yeah, it's absolutely fair, because I think for those who might see this who haven't played Guild Wars 2, they just had their 4th expansion. However, in between that, there's, let's say, 30 DLCs, which are completely optional. You don't have to get those, but they're there. And so after the 2nd expansion, Path of Fire, there was 4 or 5 years that everybody just kind of assumed that was going to be the last expansion because they didn't hear anything. And then all of a sudden, End of Dragons came out, and then it did so well that it was like the day after they said, we just got greenlit for a 4th expansion. And we were like, whoa, because it was like Christmas and then another Christmas for the people who love the game. Because, it's like we thought they were done releasing expansions, and then they just did one and then announced another right after. So my impression is, because they don't release much data on how the player population stuff's doing, but they have hinted that they said the old record was when Path of Fire came out and they broke it.
I think so. I absolutely think so. The game just kind of keeps doing better. They announced that End of Dragons had outsold the expansion before it quite quickly, and now with Secrets of the Obscure, there was actually a moment where they had to spin up more servers because there wasn't enough server capacity for everybody to play the game. By the way, no queues. They just spun up more servers and people could just play, which was really nice. But yeah, just the player base is really, really healthy right now. And I think one of the big things with Secrets of the Obscure is we're now entering this new content cadence, like you said. The idea is now to do yearly expansions and do these patches in between. This is the first time that Guild Wars 2 has ever been on a proper schedule. So in the past, it was always like, oh, we're not sure when the next patch is. We're not sure, are they going to do Living Vault? Are they going to do an expansion? It was always like a surprise. But now we know very clearly, there's an expansion, then 3 months later, there's patch 1. Then 3 months later, there's patch 2. And then, a year later, there's an expansion. So I think this is honestly really, really healthy for the game. Just actually knowing when the next big patch is and actually knowing what's roughly going to be in each patch and in each expansion. It takes away a little bit of the surprise, maybe. But, as somebody that's played Guild Wars 2 for 11 years and has always been wondering what's the next thing they'll do, it's a really nice change of pace to actually have a schedule and know what they're going to release in the next year, roughly.
I feel very positive about the future of the game, actually, and for one particular reason. So, in my mind, one of the issues, in fact, the biggest issue that has prevented the success and the kind of a slight stalling in the growth of the game has actually been that a lack of focus. Originally, we're not going to do expansions, but then they did expansions. We're not really going to do raids, but then they did raids. Then they stopped doing raids. Now we're doing strike missions. Now we're doing fractals, right? There's been this lack of focus in terms of what ArenaNet wants the game to be. Now, I think actually with Secrets of the Obscure, we see them very clearly moving in a direction and trying to focus in on a target audience and a set of things that they would like their game to do. And I view that as an overwhelmingly positive thing. I believe that having a vision, a creative vision, creative direction for your product is essential. And it's been a little bit lacking in Guild Wars. So they've tried to be all things to all people, and that just didn't really work out, to be honest. And with the new scheduling, we know exactly what's coming and exactly what they're looking for. And I think that ArenaNet is very intent on creating the best open world PvE and story kind of world building, exploration experience in the MMO genre. That is where their focus is.
The idea of it is that Guild Wars 2 has been almost tried and true outside of that normal niche. In that sense, and again, I bring up, we'll say, even like Final Fantasy, and we'll bring up World of Warcraft, but the best example of this, of why I know Guild Wars 2 will be good for a very long time, is look at RuneScape. Old school RuneScape. How many players are still playing old school RuneScape almost on a daily? How many content creators are still creating, videos and about this? I won't even try to guesstimate how old it is, despite the long content drought, specifically talking between Path of Fire to, we'll say, End of Dragons. Yeah, we had Living World Season 4, arguably the best Living World season. And then the Icebrute Saga that followed shortly after, it was kind of rushed, and it wasn't all that great. But players still played. Players still enjoyed this game. They still spent the time working on it. Content creators still were giving it all. And the game kept growing, even through this, we'll say, lull, even through this time that it, a lot of people had written it off and said, okay, that's it.
Okay, so there's a few things I could pick apart from that. I don't know that it's ever going to blow up the way that Genshin Impact has. I also don't feel it's really competing with Genshin, because I feel like the people that are drawn to play Genshin are a different group of gamers than the people who play Guild Wars 2. And that's fine. That's completely fine. It definitely, during the time that Guild Wars 2 has been out over the last 10 years, they definitely missed a few points. Like, there was a few moments when their player population was at its absolute peak, and then they released like one of the most garbage patches you've ever seen, and they lost a lot of people. Like, they lost a lot of momentum a couple of times in the history of the game. And some of those times, like, I know about from watching other YouTubers, because they were before when I started playing it. So that has happened before. However, I will also say, talking about like the new MMOs coming out, as Josh Strife Hayes would tell you, like 95% of MMOs fail. Like, it's a great thing to just throw money down a toilet. Like, if Amazon proved anything recently, it's easier to go to space than it is to make a functional MMO, because it took them so long to get New World to be in a playable state. So I really, keeping in mind EverQuest is still live, and it's got like 29 expansions. Guild Wars 1 servers are still turned on. There's a running joke that both of the players are still very happy with that. And we've got Guild Wars 2 now. So not only is Guild Wars 2 still on and functional, but they've actually told us that they've been greenlit to release a smaller expansion every year going forward. Which for those who don't follow Guild Wars 2 news, we had Heart of Thorns, then a few years, Path of Fire, then like 5 years, then End of Dragons, and then 1 year, and then Secrets of the Obscure, which is a smaller expansion. They said what they're going to do from now on is have smaller expansions, but be able to release them on a yearly release schedule instead of like multiple years in between each thing. And then within the year of that expansion, like this is the year of Secrets of the Obscure, every 3 months there will be a big patch with like another dungeon or another raid boss, something like that. So it'll be like expansion, patch, expansion, patch going on. So I have no fear at all that the game is going to get disabled or killed in any way, because it survived 5 years with virtually no updates because the game was just so good. It still kept bringing in people.
So it's a good question with, I think, a very complicated answer. So let me maybe first start with just the basics. So first things first is I think Guild Wars 2's population has exploded since End of Dragons. And this is not just speculation on my part. The developers themselves have actually said since the release of End of Dragons, they've essentially doubled, if not tripled, their active player base, which obviously tells you that the game is probably growing, at least to some degree. So financially, it's probably making a decent amount of money to support the release of future expansions. Now, here's the more complicated part, right? Is that I think for a very long time, Guild Wars 2 has had an identity crisis. I think that's the best way to put it. Initially, when the game first came out, it had a very big emphasis on PvP because it had a very action-based combat. And I think PvP, if there were ever to be a PvP in an MMO, it probably would have been Guild Wars 2. And they had a lot of competition around it. Then they kind of shifted gears from that. PvP scene became a lot more neglected. And then they kind of shifted, okay, World vs. World is going to be our cornerstone game, right? Because no other game can like provide this feeling of 50v50v50. And then slowly kind of World vs. World started gathering dust, didn't really get the updates that they promised, that kind of thing. And it left a lot of players disillusioned, right? It's like, okay, they promised they were going to do this thing, but then they ended up not doing it. And then you kind of like see a pattern of this happening a lot, where they said they were going to release the Living World episodes, right? And they were going to be, you know, really focusing on this like essentially expansion level content without it actually being an expansion. And then they kind of did that for a while, but then that kind of like petered out too, because you might have noticed with End of Dragons and then Secrets of Frontier, there's no Living World. And then now it's kind of like finally at the point where like, okay, we're going to give like raids and strike missions and like all of this like revamping core systems. This is going to be our focus now, right? So there's a lot of players that I think have a healthy skepticism that they're actually going to be able to follow up on what they're saying, because the reality is that they have made similar promises in the past and then didn't follow up on them. I like to think of myself as a bit of an optimist though, and also because I mean I like the game, I want the game to survive, right? It's like that would be great for me if the game did really well. So I'm a bit more of an optimist. I think at least the efforts that they have put into the game, especially in the past 3 to 4 years or so, shows that the game is going on a positive trajectory. I think this is the longest period of time where they have said that they're going to do something and then actually did it. So for a lot of players, it might be too little too late. But for me, I think, you know what? I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Most importantly, and this is the entire premise and topic of the video, is Guild Wars 2 worth playing in 2023, moving into 2024? See, I personally don't think that Guild Wars 2 has really shown what they're capable of yet. Final Fantasy XIV over the last few years has continued to grow. Guild Wars 2 are showing us that they have a lot left in them and are making sufficient improvements to attract and increase their overall player size via both new and old players. Now, if all of you were playing this game for the very first time with absolutely no bias whatsoever, and I know this is going to be hard, would you prioritize playing Guild Wars 2 over other available and potentially more popular and successful games?
So, removing absolutely all my bias, all my past experience, and just coming into it blind, and in that sense, of course, any type of game that I would go, based off of that example, any type of game that I go into, I learn about really where I'm at with my life, and as I kind of pretexted before, or pretensed, that, I don't get a whole lot of time to play, so I have to make sure that we'll say, I don't want to say every dollar, I'm not that much of a penny pincher, but I look at like, okay, how much value can I get out of any given game if I am logging in every single day? Like, so any type of free-to-play game, and I think that would be the initial hook. I'd say, okay, Guild Wars 2 is a free-to-play game. I get in there and I'm able to, you know, mess around and try some stuff out. I'll obviously see that they want to upgrade to the expansion. It's a game, they want to make money. Okay, cool. But there's no subscription model. Okay, you have my interest. I'm paying attention now. I'm going to take a little bit more. I would probably say, yeah, I would definitely get hooked into it the same way. And it's funny is because going all pretense, all bias, and having no experience with Guild Wars 2 and anything like that, honestly, it's the artwork. I know that's a weird thing, but I think the artwork would really hook me.
I mean, it's pretty difficult to put aside my bias as an absolute Guild Wars 2 fangirl. But yes, absolutely. Just the game's been coming sort of like it's been appearing in the news like a ton recently because of like these sort of regular expansions that they're finally doing. I think I would probably get pulled in by that. I would just be like, oh, I keep hearing about this Guild Wars 2 game. Wow. It doesn't have quite the same name recognition as something like WoW or Final Fantasy, so it doesn't have that same star power, but recently it's been popping up a lot. A lot of people have been talking about it. There's a lot of stuff about it on like the different subreddits and on social media, so I'd probably give it a shot. And then I think I would be pulled in the same way that I was pulled in like 11 years ago. Just like exploring the world, seeing these dynamic events, looking at how beautiful the game is. And then at the same time combined with like, there's all these expansions now. If you jump in now, there's like so much stuff for you to play. There's like, the amount of content is staggering. It's almost like overwhelming. So honestly, right now is a really good time to start the game. There's so much content. The game has got a bright future where we know that there's going to be more expansions and we know there's going to be a patch every 3 months. I really don't think there's a better time to get started than now.
So I can only speak for, how my brain works, of course. I'm very much a try it before I judge it kind of thing. I might be like, oh yeah, I haven't played Red Dead Redemption. I don't think it really appeals to me, but I'll be honest, I haven't tried it. Stuff like that. I did try Elder Scrolls Online for a few weeks. I played like 100 hours. I tried Final Fantasy 14 to be like 15 hours. And to be fair, even Final Fantasy 14 players tell me that the early game is awful. But I tried the early game and I could not get into it. For me, it felt too much like WoW. I always had to hold still to cast spells. I was Frostbolt, mana bar, stuff like that. And I was like, this feels awful. Guild Wars 2, even if I was trying it from scratch, it was that combat system. Didn't have to hold still, didn't have a mana bar, could run around, do backflips to dodge attacks, like just in the newbie zone. I could do all of those things at level 2. Like it got its hooks in me with that combat system very early on. So yeah, it is still worth playing. As far as like, is it worth playing in current year? One, you can play it to max level for free and just try it to see if you like it. So that's a very friendly incentive. It's now on Steam, so you can do it on Steam or off Steam. They don't have a subscription model, so you can just jump in and you don't have to like pay a monthly fee or pay a down payment on the game at the beginning. And it still holds up very well.
Honest answer is, if I were right now in my current point in life, I would not play an MMO at all. Like, because I have this previous conception that MMOs take a lot of time. There's a lot of grind involved. You have to like, there's always that fear of missing out, right? It's like, oh, they released this new thing. All of your old gear is like useless now. You need to race so that you can get the better gear. And then when you race to get the better gear, then you're like competing and then you can make a lot of money. To me, I don't really have that time anymore. So I think given my current situation, I would not play an MMO at all. That being said, if I had to choose one, and I heard that, this game in particular does not have as much of a vertical grind, I would probably gravitate towards that one. So then obviously then that means Guild Wars 2. So I think I would probably start it. But then again, I feel like this is where it's hard to say because I'm not in this situation. But I would also probably say I would not play the game nearly as much as I do now, because I would probably forever remain just like a casual-ish player. Like log in a couple of hours a week, smack out some dailies, and then like, make my character look kind of nice, and then that's kind of it. Whereas like nowadays, I definitely consider myself a fairly hardcore player, right? Because I've done all of the pinnacle content. Actually, something recently that I've started doing is I chase parsing logs. So I try to get like #1 damage dealt like ever in this entire patch for a specific class or build. So nowadays I do a lot of that because I have a lot of emotional connection to the game. I know the game systems very well. I don't really have that ramp up time to learn the game anymore. So yeah. I think another thing that I want to mention is a big draw for me initially with Guild Wars 2, if you had asked me this question like 10 years ago, something like that, is that it had no subscription fee. Because I was a poor college student and I was like, I don't even have $10 to spend on eating out this week. Are you kidding me? I'm not going to spend that on a video game when I have to like do studying and like get ready for exams and like jobs and internships and all that kind of stuff. I was just going to go play the free one instead. And that's exactly how I started, is I wanted something that was not a free competitive game, cough, League of Legends. And so I picked the free MMO game, and that just happened to be Guild Wars.
And another big advantage here is that because the game doesn't have this gear treadmill thing, it's really easy to catch up. There's no like, oh, I have to play like a really long time until I'm max level and until I can get good gear and get into the end game. You can get to max level in like less than a week. and you can get best installed gear in also like less than a week, and you can just start playing all the content. So, would recommend.
Yeah, I would 100% say yeah. If it's just kind of, because it very much depends, right? Like, I don't think Guild Wars 2 is going to appeal to everyone, in the same way that I don't think WoW or Final Fantasy is going to appeal to everyone. So I think to answer that question, you need a little bit more context for sure. But if you're talking about like, yeah, I'm just an MMO player, I just, you know, I blast, I go, yeah, 100%. I think Guild Wars 2 is worth a try, yeah. To be clear, I do feel the need to de-sell out myself here a little bit. I think I'd actually say that about most MMOs, to be fair, because, you know, I think, you know, I'm so boring. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, dear viewers. I actually think, and don't tell anyone I said this, I actually think all MMOs are pretty damn good, actually. I think they're all pretty good, you know. They're worth a shot, in my opinion. But yeah, I'd 100% say the same for Guild Wars 2. The game is in a good, healthy spot. Population's good. Content release schedule is finally actually solid. Right? It's been a rocky road, but we got here in the end. And this is, you know, maybe this is important to some people, but I actually am a big fan of the game director. Currently, actually, I like the leadership team at ArenaNet currently. I have a very strong belief that they're going to steer the game in a good direction that will improve it over time. So I think it's not going anywhere anytime soon. Very stable MMO, good leadership, good population. Game is fun to play, right? And hey, if you try it, you don't like it, hey, well, you know, you didn't have to grind 1 million hours to get into it, so not much lost.
Is still just as valid as the day that it had been originally released. And that's a beautiful thing about this game, is that you can play the most recent Secrets of the Obscure. You can play the whole expansion, you can do all the fun stuff, really enjoy that. Then an additional $30 unlock, we'll say, the Heart of Thorns expansion, the Maguma Jungle. You'll get the new elite specializations, and you can unpack it as you want, or you could just focus on the one bit that you really enjoy, and that's all you wanted to do.
You know, if you're playing a certain MMO, and if there's a bit of a content drought, if you're a bit bored, you're a bit burned out, you can just like hop into Guild Wars 2 for a little bit, and then like stop for like half a year, and then hop back into it. It's a great MMO to sort of like play in between your other stuff.
I think one thing that players are really worried about, and this is some advice I'd give to a new player. A lot of players, because I get this a lot, a lot of new players talk to me. And they're always like, oh, you know, what should I do first? Should I do this, right? Guild Wars 2 is actually a game that is extraordinarily difficult to play wrong. Really hard. Like, there's almost nothing you can do that's actually gonna screw you over, pretty much. So, like, a big piece of advice, don't worry about doing it optimally or doing it the best way. Just get in there and press some buttons and wander around and see what happens. And that's very much in the spirit of the game, right? Like, the game definitely has this exploration style element to it that, you know, the game wants you to wander around and get lost. And don't be afraid of doing that. Do it. In fact, be glad of it. You only get to do it once.
And that is Guild Wars 2 in 2023. Hopefully that aids you if you were on the fence about trying the game out. I personally think that this is the perfect opportunity, hot off the success of Secrets of the Obscure. Now, if you enjoyed this new style of video, let me know down in the comments below, because I would love to do more. I would love to feature dozens of other content creators in various different MMO niches and within various other MMO communities and games. Do not forget to check out the socials or the channels of all of the creators that appeared in this video. They're all absolutely incredible. Now, if this is not something that you're at all interested in though, absolutely no problem. Consider checking out one of the 2 videos on screen right now.